I'm sure everybody listening to this can feel the presence of a mission that's not just to survive and reproduce, but that you're here for a reason, to contribute to a more beautiful world. If you're not doing that, you're going to feel quite dissatisfied with your life.
Hi, I'm Amisha, and this is episode 1 of The Future is Beautiful. This podcast comes from a project that I started 7 years ago called Think, Act, Vote, when it struck me that our political system was broken and that we could no longer rely on politicians or political parties to create the future that we choose. It struck me that we are all creating the future through how we spend our time, money and energy, and so taking time to figure out our visions individually and collectively was key to creating a brighter future. We did a series of creative activism projects and brought it all together into a collaborative book in which over 200 contributors share their vision of the future they choose and how we can create it with them. The book launched at the Rio+20 climate talks in 2012 with the title, The Future We Choose. And then I released a new edition last year with the new name, The Future is Beautiful. I could have called it The Future is FUCKED unless we do something about it. But actually there are so many incredible people whose work and presence in the world really is creating a beautiful future. And if more of us can be exposed to these people and ideas and rise up in ourselves, we really can create a beautiful future. I want to read you the introduction I wrote for the new edition. What struck me during the process of creating this book was how beautiful people are. The visions, inspirations and actions shared in these pages are the makings of a beautiful future. The future is beautiful because the human spirit is beautiful. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures that we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to dream, to ask ourselves the big questions and to share what we are already doing, we create the future that we wish to wake up for. Our time here is precious. It's easy to forget. When we connect to our hearts and minds and what unites us, our innate goodness and beauty, we find so much possibility, so much opportunity. This is the revolution. It's happening right now. It's to be found in the day-to-day moments of our lives. When we encounter it, we feel more alive. You don't have to be anything that you are not already. Find your voice. Speak your truth. Embody your values. Let this book be your guide. Let it illuminate your soul where it may have grown dim or tired. Let the spark of joy, light and hope that each of these contributions holds inspire you. Let your imagination run wild. Create the future. We are the future. These words really illustrate why I wanted to take this project into a podcast, as I feel there are so many people in the world I come across that are doing incredible things who don't get enough airtime. This show takes us out of the mainstream narrative into deep, long, authentic, unedited conversations. I sit down with my guests face to face so we get that level of intimacy that you don't get on a video call. I will be alternating every week between a male and a female guest, and over time I hope to bring real diversity to the show, both in terms of people from different cultures and backgrounds, as well as people that you have heard of and unsung heroes you have not. For me, this project has always been a labour of love, something that I work on just because I know it's important. This podcast is starting the same way. I really want this to be an advertising-free space that focuses on people, not on products. Focuses on the people on the show, you, the people listening to the show, and the people behind the scenes that make the show. And so we're launching a Patreon campaign that means we can be supported to make this by you, the community. If you enjoy this show and would like to make a monthly donation, that would be wonderful. My first guest that we have today is Charles Eisenstein, who is one of those people who, when I came across him and read his books and listened to his talks, I felt so comforted that he exists in the world and that he is sharing what's in his heart and in his mind. What he brings is so far away from what we have in the dominant narrative in our media and daily lives, and yet it resonates so deeply. We recorded this in Spain as we sat up a mountain amongst the crickets. As we did the interview, we were in eye contact for the whole conversation. It's a beautiful exploration of his work, of sacred economics, of climate change, and really of how we show up of more of ourselves and create that more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. I really hope that you enjoy this interview and that this podcast opens something up for you. Thank you for coming on this journey with me. I look forward to getting to know you over the coming weeks and months. Welcome to The Future is Beautiful, with me, your host, Amisha Ghadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between politics, spirituality, creativity, and sustainability. The people, projects, and ideas we meet here are creating a beautiful future for all of us right now. For this first episode of the Future is Beautiful podcast, I'm delighted to be joined by Charles Eisenstein, the author and writer, and someone whose work has been a huge inspiration to me. And when I had the idea to take this podcast forward, Charles, you were definitely someone that I wanted to interview and to have as part of this. And it's really so beautiful the way it's come together that you're actually the first guest on the show. Welcome.
Thank you.
My first question is, there was something that you were saying. Actually, yesterday we're here at the Aniwa gathering, and we're on this island in Spain, in Ibiza, joined with all these elders from all over the world. And so we've been talking about these different ways of living and these different stories that are present right now, the dominant story in the world, and actually some of these ancient stories that have been here for a long time that we're starting to see might be actually have more to offer than the dominant story has given them credit for. And something you said that really struck me was about how we need to sensitize the world that we're in more. And I know you talked about being sensitive as you grew up, a sensitive child. What does that mean, to sensitize the world?
It's a good question. Obviously, it's not working to try to just convince people that it would be smarter to conserve natural resources or reduce carbon emissions or something like that. Something else has to happen. And a lot of what the environmental movement does, a lot of what the environmental movement does today is it tries to bribe us or threaten us into caring. Mm-hmm. Talking about the disaster that'll happen if we don't conserve what are called our resources or natural resources, or telling us the economic benefits or the PR benefits or whatever benefits will come to you, the medicines that will be made from biodiverse rainforests or something like that. But I think that whole mindset is part of the problem. The mindset of, how will it benefit me? How will it benefit us? Like, what about actually caring and loving the rest of the world? Like, no one has to pay me or threaten me for me to take care of my children, because I love them. So that's the question. How do we, I haven't answered it yet, but how do we get in touch with that love that's really already there? It's not something that we have to make some people do. It's just just removing the barriers that cut us off from that. And I think that any experience that connects, any experience that gives the opportunity to feel empathy for another being, could be a human being, opens us up more generally to feeling the other and caring for the other as well. And that's why I think that, even work that is very social and not ecological in its orientation is also ecological work, because it expands, when it's done in that spirit, it expands our general connection to the world and our capacity and our sensitivity. So, I mean, for me, one thing that sensitizes me is if I see something or even hear a story that stirs me up and that evokes my compassion and that allows me to feel the pain of another being or the joy of another being too. Especially when that story is presented to me without riding the vehicle of blame. When it's accompanied by guilt, and let me know if I'm talking too long, but when it's accompanied, when it's accompanied by guilt, then it creates resistance. And then you're back in the world of bribes and threats. Care, or you are a bad person. Like, but that's not enough. That can make somebody pretend to care. But what they're really caring about is, oh, do you approve of me? Am I one of the good guys? Like, that's not what we want people to care about. We want people to actually care. To actually care about the world, about the elephants, about the whales, about the refugees. And not to look as if they care in order to be politically correct. And that's why guilt and shame are generally not a very good way to I got a little distracted by that. I hope all of you guys out there are not distracted by it.
We just had a stampede of Spanish children running around us.
But that's cool, you know, it's like not studio perfection.
No, like, we're out in the world.
We are out in the world, yeah. So, I think as kind of political strategies, guilting and shaming people into doing the right thing, in the end is counterproductive.
Why do you feel like we are, why are we so conditioned to not just innately care?
Well, our system distances us and cuts us off from those who are suffering. It's our food system gives us food that's been grown and very far away from us. You know, we're distanced from the source of our food, the source of all the things that we use, the effects of strip mining for metals or digging for rare earth minerals that go into our cell phones, like the damage that's happening in Bolivia, that's happening in Congo. It's not visible to us.
Yeah.
And we've created many, and not just economic systems, but also ideological systems that cut us off.
Yeah.
Like, we don't even see the world. Like, most people don't think that a tree can suffer or that a lake could suffer. Yeah, it's just a bunch of water, you know, it's just a plant. It doesn't have a central nervous system. We don't have a worldview that holds the world as alive and sentient. So to love it, then, seems kind of irrational, you know, kind of wishy-washy, kind of woo-woo, you know, like, kind of like if I said I love my pet brick. My brick is sad right now. I'm going to take care of it, you know.
Yeah.
Like, you would think I was kind of childish. And there's that same suspicion of childishness if you're a tree hugger, you know, if you're say, oh, I'm in love with this river, and the river, like, that just seems like you don't say that kind of stuff at the climate policy table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you are allowed to love your pet dog.
Yeah.
And you're allowed to love your iPhone and a dress. Those are all perfectly acceptable things to love. But rivers and trees, not so much.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of that is just our story that we live in.
It's been interesting for me. I was, you know, born with my sensitivity completely intact. And it's been, like a problem in inverted commas for most of my life. I've been, oh, you're just too sensitive, Amisha. Like, get on with it. Like, why do you care about this? Or like, why do you feel, that's nothing to do with you. Why do you feel guilty? Why do you want to get involved in that? And so for most of my life, my sensitivity just was this thing that just, it even hurt me that I was sensitive because I didn't know what to do with it. And it took me really until I got into my 30s to honor it as a gift. The gift of being sensitive, the gift of being able to tune into other people, the gift of being able to listen to the river or talk to the tree or whatever it is. How has that journey been in your own life of being someone that's sensitive and tuned in a world that doesn't honor and respect that? Like for me, it's been a lot of shame. Like that's what I've had to get through, and it's why it took so long to release the shame and just step into the honoring of who I am.
For a while, I just shut it down. I think a lot of people do that. Some people shut it down with drugs and alcohol, and then everybody thinks that they're less spiritually developed than the non-addicted person. But it could be that they're just very sensitive and that they've been confronted directly maybe with more pain than they can handle. If they're abused or something like that, that might be one reason why they find ways to shut down feeling. But it could just be that they're also just very sensitive. And that, we're all born with different makeup. So I didn't really use drugs and alcohol so much. But I developed habits of shut down, intellectualization, it can be more subtle too. It can be distraction. A lot of things can give you a momentary good feeling and take you away from the pain. And when that becomes habitual, it becomes an addiction that can be very subtle. It could be the addiction to thoughts of your brilliant future, or it could be an addiction to, like, you always go to this self-image about how you're part of the solution, not part of the problem. At least you're doing something about it. At least you're driving a ecological car or riding your bicycle. So it can be like these kind of psychological addictions that mitigate the pain, at least temporarily. A lot of the pain comes from, we become agents in our own oppression by directing the violence toward ourselves, rejecting ourselves, making ourselves miserable, feeling guilty. I'm not sure if I want to go off on that whole tangent, but a lot of the pain comes from habits that we've been indoctrinated into. In the beginning, it might be parents shaming us, or religious authorities or teachers, telling us that we're bad. But eventually we take on that responsibility ourselves. I guess that's a kind of a different, the reason I'm hesitating to go into it is that's maybe a slightly different issue than just being born really sensitive.
But it's also part of it, because part of the issue with the sensitivity is that we're meant to be like great all the time and like pushing towards our future and, getting on with it and feeling good. And And for me, part of that journey of sensitivity has been about honoring the pain and the suffering and the anger and the guilt, because, you know, we are like living in a society, and, you know, society meaning the dominant story, where we are so cut off from nature, from each other. And you said yesterday that when we look out of the window, we see strangers. When we walk around, we see strangers. The people we bump into in the shop, we don't really know who they are or what their experiences are, who their father was, all of these things.
Yeah. More and more people don't really even know their neighbors.
Yeah.
You know, like depends on the neighborhood. In America, like sometimes people pretty much know most of their neighbors, but not like when I was a kid. When I was a kid, like you pretty much knew everybody's story. Although that was degrading. It was nothing like a small town 100 years ago, where you knew everybody's story and their grandparents' story. And you knew like the first time they fell in love, and you knew like, I mean, everything, you were totally known. And today we don't have that. So there's kind of well, you could just say it's loneliness, because human beings are social, not only to meet our, quote, emotional needs, but even to feel fully alive and at home in the world. We need to be known. We're not separate individuals, really. So so our full beingness comes only through rich relationships. And when the relationships are cut off, as they are in a modern context, we feel a deficit of being, a hunger to be more than this narrow, cut off, separate self, cut off from other people, cut off from nature. Mm-hmm. We want to step into our full beingness. And so what we are offered to expand the narrow, separate self isn't deep relationship with people and with nature. What we're offered is money, quote, success, products, things, and the implicit message behind all of those, used very consciously by advertisers, is have this and you'll be okay now.
Yeah.
You'll be full now. You'll be complete now. So, and it's speaking to a real need.
Yeah.
It's not because of greed, or you could say greed is actually a symptom of this deep unmet need to feel at home in the universe. And that only happens with rich connections.
Yeah.
And so we're born into this society that is structurally set up to not meet our most important needs.
And so this is moving into the age of we need each other, as you called it recently. And what else does that look like apart from our personal connections? And how does that look like in terms of a more societal, political, ecological?
Well, on the most obvious level, ecologically, we have to understand that we need nature to be healthy and full and vibrant. We're kind of learning that now. 100 years ago, nobody thought that. We thought that the future was going to be that we would eliminate all of the harmful species and preserve all of the beneficial species, that we were going to make this earth better by culling out the wrong ones and controlling it more, engineering it more. And some futurists thought that maybe we wouldn't need nature at all. Like you had the bubble cities where there's nothing alive except for humans, with, you know, food in a pill, synthetic food. And even today, you know, like sometimes you have these futuristic visions where instead of a view of nature, you have like a big 3D screen and you can look at really beautiful scenes all the time. The idea being that human destiny is to graduate beyond nature. That has been the story. And it's still with us today, but we're beginning to understand now that our well-being is connected to the well-being of all creatures and the planet itself. That's the true message of climate change, is that what we do to the planet is going to happen to us too. So our understanding is still very, very shallow. Most people don't really believe that the welfare of the great horned owl, or the fairy shrimp, or the river dolphin of the Yangtze River, which is extinct or almost extinct. Most people don't really believe that is going to hurt them if that dolphin goes extinct. Is it going to really help you pay the next rent payment if the dolphin survives? Like most people, is it going to make you healthier? Most people don't think that it will. That's because our understanding is still very, very shallow. We don't understand how you take one thing out, you remove one thing, extinguish one thing, and it starts a trophic cascade, a ripple of change, of illness out into the cosmos that ultimately comes back to you. Like, we don't understand that as a basic principle of the universe. We think, well, this species is important because it serves this ecological function, but that one maybe is not that important. This ecosystem is important, that one is maybe less important. The whales, maybe they're important because they're a keystone species, but not we don't really get it yet. But we're learning. The climate change issue is at its core an awakening. We're going to learn that we've got climate change, we've misunderstood it, and that a healthy climate depends much more on having healthy ecosystems everywhere than it does on which gases we emit. Like, if we had healthy mangroves, healthy rainforests, healthy grasslands, kelp forests, seagrass, the numbers of fish that have declined by, 90%. And if we had a really healthy planet, then greenhouse gases wouldn't matter that much. And if we continue to destroy ecosystems everywhere, then we could cut emissions to zero and it wouldn't matter. The planet would still die.
And is it possible to do all of this when we still have factories dumping chemical toxic waste into rivers? All of these things are still happening despite all the research, despite the physical consequences that are happening.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought years ago, when I've been working in sustainability, there's just going to be this Armageddon moment and everyone's just going to wake up and we're going to start doing things differently. And I feel like so many of these incidents have happened, and the world is saying, the planet, I mean by the world, is saying, okay guys, this isn't working. Yeah. But yet still, so many of these behaviors are dominant.
I thought that back in the 80s, when I read National Geographic on Amazonian deforestation, and I had the picture from the map, of forest extent in 1850, 1950, and 1980, and it's shrinking and it's terrible. And I'm like, wow, that is terrible, but thank God it's in National Geographic now, so we'll definitely do something about it now. And we haven't done anything about it. Mm-hmm. Deforestation is continuing, and in many places accelerating. Look what happened to Borneo. Almost all the rainforests are gone. That was the third largest rainforest in the world. Sumatra. It's just heartbreaking. Yeah. It's not so easy to change. It's not that... See, even if people are convinced of this on an intellectual level, they still feel powerless to do more than superficial changes. Because, and I'm not talking about just ordinary people, but, I would love to change, but the, fair trade, ecological products are so much more expensive, and I don't have the money, and I've got a mortgage to pay, and like people feel trapped. I've got to drive to work. I can't just quit my job. But also the corporate executives feel just as trapped. A friend of mine, Polly Higgins, who's a earth lawyer. Yeah, she's
amazing
pretty.
Woman.
Yeah, she's awesome. And she was telling me about a conversation she had with a executive, like a chief executive of, may have been a coal company. And he was like, I think that coal mining should stop completely. This whole industry's wrong. But I can't say that in public. What will middle management say? What will the board of directors say? They'll kick me out in the blink of an eye and replace me with somebody who's worse. So, like, I'm powerless. Don't talk to me. It's like the whole system that assigns this role that I'm fulfilling, and if I don't fulfill it, someone else will fulfill it. And you can, so he might say it's the politicians, but they will feel just as helpless too. I've had conversations with politicians, and they're like, "Yeah, Charles, I agree with everything you're saying, but you got to understand, I can't do anything about it. It's the opposition party, it's the voters, it's the press, it's this, that, and the other thing. It's the system, it's the international bond markets that prevent you from doing anything that'll make your country less competitive, because then your interest rates will go up, your debt will be downgraded, and you'll have to extract even more resources in order to meet your foreign exchange obligations." So, like, so basically what I'm saying, it's not that we're helpless, but it's that to do the things that are really necessary requires real courage. So for me, the question becomes, where does courage come from? Where does that commitment come from that I'll do whatever it takes?
Where does it come from? How do we
comes from love.
Nurture that?
Comes from love. Like if my child were lost outside and someone comes and says, "Hey, I saw your son way over there where the poisonous snakes are." And I'm like, that sounds bad. Let me finish this game of Tetris and I'll go look for him. Like, I wouldn't do that, would I? I would, if I believed you, I would jump right up and I would run out there and look for him, no matter what. Like that level of caring comes from love and from a direct feedback loop that what you love is in danger.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because, like, in the example that you gave, it makes me feel like we're forced to show up with only part of ourselves in all of these different roles. And if we could just show up whole, we could bring everything that we are into whatever we do, rather than have to just meet a role for approval. And then maybe, like you said, like the people making these decisions that are in all of these systems are actually really loving fathers, really loving mothers, really a completely different person in their personal life and their private life. And it feels to me that if we could create a space where people could actually just be who they are in whatever they do, it would make a big shift in everything. Mm-hmm. If there wasn't fear that if I say what I really feel, then I lose my job, then everything becomes uncertain, then I'm putting my kids in danger, and all of this kind of ripple that comes from essentially being in the heart.
Right. It's not an unfounded fear. If you really speak what's in your heart, you might lose your job.
Yeah, you will, probably.
Yeah, I've lost jobs for that reason, actually.
Yeah, me too.
Not that I've ever really had jobs, but yeah. I've had part-time employment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so how do we create a culture that isn't driven by this fear?
I don't know.
You
tell me. We don't know how to create such a culture.
Yeah.
I think the way it'll happen is that that as our current culture becomes more and more dysfunctional and encounters one crisis after another, at some point it may become impossible to keep it going anymore. And then people will be open to alternatives. And none of the alternatives will be the right one. But through the process of multiple failures, we will develop wisdom. And something will emerge that is not on anybody's radar screen right now. But it will be a manifestation of the shift in the psychic climate. Because as the circle of love expands from just that executive's immediate family, as people have experiences that put them more back in touch with the world, and there is a movement of consciousness now, an expansion of consciousness. I see it, especially in young people, like the kind of emotional intelligence and awareness and kind of fluency in the methods of self-development. This kind of stuff, just things like taking ownership of your projections, even that concept of, oh, this might not be just a bad person. They've got their story, and what am I projecting onto them, and what is it showing me about myself? Like, that whole way of thinking is native to my children. But it wasn't even a concept when I was 21. Like, that was not on the radar screen. Maybe, in psychoanalytic circles or something, but as far as me and the guys on the track team, that was not in our universe. And today it is. So we are evolving underneath the surface. The structures have not evolved. The structures have gotten worse. But the core, the foundation of those structures is dissolving and shifting. And that makes the structures themselves very weak. They look solid, but they're very weak. They could collapse like that. Like the financial system could collapse like that. And no one cares enough about it to try to put it back together again the way that it was. We're not in love with it anymore. It doesn't embody our consciousness anymore. We don't think that it's the best way to do things anymore. So that's how it'll happen, through some kind of initiatory crisis. I'm not necessarily saying that it's going to be the total collapse of civilization. It'll be something that seems a lot scarier from this side than it will from the other side once we've gone through it. But it has to be something that makes normal untenable, that loosens the grip of normal. And then we'll try things, and nothing will work until we get something that really is close to embodying the changing consciousness.
Beautiful. And so then, for our friends listening, it's about making this shift to courage internally to be prepared for this shifting of the systems,
right,
this collapse. And it's not so much about us going out and feeling that pressure to shop differently, to campaign for this, to do all of that stuff, although you
might do that stuff.
Yeah.
You might end up doing that stuff as a result of your growing courage. And you might do something that might even seem counterintuitive. Like, I'll say again, we don't really know how this planet works very well. And the things that are presented to us as the most important thing you can do for the planet, those operate on a very superficial level. It might be that the most important thing you can do for a planet is to care for an old woman with dementia when no one else in the family will. Yeah. And what's the carbon footprint of that? You can't calculate that. And the rational mind says, how is this helping the planet? She's going to die anyway. She's not even grateful. And no one thinks I'm doing anything important compared to, the activist out there. But if that is where I was going to say your heart, but it's more than that. It's that feeling of, this is what I'm supposed to be doing right now. This is what I care about right now. And I can't make sense of it. But that is courage, to follow the heart. I think the word probably even means something like that, full of heart.
It does in French.
Yeah,
the root of it.
So, yeah, it may not be campaigning. You might be doing something that is a lot less rewarding in the external sense, that doesn't garner praise, that doesn't burnish your image as a progressive activist, changing the world. A lot of people who are out there changing the world end up causing more harm than good.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. But I want to say about courage, though, don't think that this is something that if you try harder, you can have more courage. Courage comes from love. Don't think you're going to be more loving by trying harder to be loving either. This comes to us as a gift. When you experience love, then courage is born. Love is contagious. So if there's a message, it's not try to be more courageous. Mm-hmm. It's feel the love. And feel the love in this conversation. Feel the love that I'm speaking of, that is knocking at the door, that is coming into our lives in these experiences that just leave us so grateful. I didn't even deserve this, and look what I've received, these little miracles. Then courage is born, and you might, come away from this conversation feeling something shifted a little bit, feeling like it's not that maybe that you know what to do now, but maybe there's something you already knew that you wanted to do, but it seems like too inconvenient or too big, and now it doesn't seem that way anymore. And then you do those things, and you become a transmission agent of courage. Yeah, this is nothing new, it's like spreading the love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then with that, this shift in this idea of wealth, so this entitlement to, be able to have all these things and and shifting into this space of an inner sense of wealth, and then the ability to gift.
Yeah. The inner sense of wealth comes from connection, feeling connected to humans, to community, to nature, to unseen beings, to have that feeling of belonging here, being at home here, being secure here. Someone in community feels free to give everything they have because they know that the community supports them. And because they are generous, everybody in the community is wealthy. Everybody has plenty to share. Most of us don't live in real community. We live in a society where it seems that the generous person gets left out. They have none, and the generosity doesn't come back to them. On a cosmic level, that's not true. And you might even notice that really generous people, somehow they're taken care of, usually. But there's the monetary system that we live in is fundamentally competitive. It's mathematically impossible for everybody to pay their debt, because there's always more debt than there is money because of the way money's created. So we live in a system that militates against our desire to be generous and connected. Yeah. But this entitlement, actually, we are entitled to that kind of wealth. We are entitled to be deeply connected. We've been robbed. So, I think the entitlement comes from a valid place. What's happened, though, is that people have been tricked. They've been duped into thinking that what they're really entitled to are the decorations of privilege and status. But those are substitutes for what we really want and need. So when I see wealthy people, usually what I see is a poor person with lots of wealth, with lots of things. The real wealthy people, we saw some of them here, some of these indigenous people. Like, their well-being doesn't depend on money, doesn't depend on controlling anything.
And everything that they need is provided to them.
Yeah. Right. And not just tangible needs.
And then, what is the definition of someone that's poor?
Well, I guess I use the word in different ways in different contexts. But to be stripped of our relations, that's poverty. And even if you have $1 million, if you're stripped of your relations, then your security is only as good as that $1 million. And that could disappear overnight in a financial crisis.
And when we talk about this poorness, like, something twinges in my heart, because because I know that so many of the people that I know, or the people in my society, are poor in this way. And that not only are we stripped of these relations, but there's also this kind of fear of neediness, like we're not supposed to need anything other than what we've got. And I find that really sad, that there's this shame of wanting to connect, or, it's like, and not wanting to get lost in the television as a way of feeling some sense of connection that someone's talking to you.
Yeah. Television is a substitute for what we really need as well. You feel connected. You feel involved in the lives of the celebrities and the stories happening on the screen. Because that's one of the needs. We want to be involved in people's stories, Like, we have such a hankering to know what's, like, even like gossip originates in a kind of social grooming or social maintenance, where we want to know what's up with everybody. And it can kind of get turned into this backstabbing kind of like secrets. But really what it wants is transparency, to be seen. That's what people want. They want to feel so at home in the world that you're okay with being seen. So yeah, television kind of hooks onto the unmet need. In general, that's what most sales does. It hooks onto an unmet need. And the unmet need can be very real. Like, people have a need for food. When in England, when enclosure happened, people all of a sudden became food insecure. And then they had to work for wages. Before then, you could not really get people to work in factories. Not like the Dickensian factories that started up in the 17th, 18th century. Like, you couldn't get people to work in those conditions. Why would they want to when they could glean from the fields and they had rights to the commons? You had to strip that away. That's how economic growth happens. That's how business works. This is a bit cynical, but it comes from selling back to people the things that have been robbed of them. So you take away the land, you take away emotional connection with others, you take away the ability to heal each other, you take away collective security, and then you can sell them childcare, you can sell them medicine, you can sell them insurance, which is a substitute for everyone helping each other out. So the business plan is that you render people helpless to take care of themselves and to take care of each other. Then they are endlessly needy. That's poverty.
I'm working on a book at the moment, and it's sort of about sustainable fashion, but it's not really. It's about how it's called Style and Presence, and it's about how style comes from knowing who we are and what we want to express in the world and responding to the times that we live in. So recognizing this humanitarian and ecological crisis, that presence is being in authenticity with that. So actually having this ability to be centered in a world that's always trying to sell us stuff. So it doesn't just become a thing of, instead of buying this handbag that was made in a sweatshop, I'm going to buy a handbag that was made sustainably. But it becomes more like, what is it? Why am I reacting to the desire to have the handbag in the first place? And part of the story and the issue around stuff and the way that things have been set up is that then there's this whole argument that, but if those factories closed down, all those people in Bangladesh, in India, would not have jobs. And now they need these jobs to live and to eat. And so where do we go with that? Like because these are like human beings, right? That now we've created this system where there's this sense that the only way that the people that, used to be fine, they just had farms where they could grow vegetables, but now their farms are covered in pesticides and they can't grow vegetables. And how can we undo this? And how can we shift back to a place where we as the West, as this dominant culture, as this stuff-oriented, consuming-oriented culture, can actually create a space where other cultures that were doing just fine before all of this interference. Mm-hmm. I mean, the interference is a long story, obviously, with colonialism. But is there a future that's possible where people living in countries in places like Asia and places like Latin America can be free to live a life that isn't driven or economically driven, and these basic needs aren't driven by what's happening in the West?
Well, two things come to mind right away. First is the ideology of development that is propagated through the media, through universities, through NGOs, the World Bank, et cetera, that says that you may think that you're happy in your little Indian village, but what you really want is air conditioning and automobiles. And see, look, they want it. I had a conversation with someone here who was like, well, say what you want, but those people want air conditioning. They want automobiles. They want apartment buildings. They don't want to live in little huts, How do I know that they want them? Because they buy them when they're available and they have the money to do it. So my response to that, there's like this whole argument against the anti-colonialist narrative, which says, well, those people are choosing it. Like, they want to develop. And my response to that is, what is the context of that wanting? If you degrade somebody's original way of life to the point where it's unlivable, of course they're going to want modern things. If you can no longer thrive with your local agriculture, of course you're going to want food from the outside. If your lifestyle has been portrayed as low, backward, and degrading, and your children have been seized and put into schools that inculcate modern values in them, of course they're going to not want to stay in the village. So it's a very systemic problem. So there's the ideology of development that says that everybody should be like us. That's human destiny, is to not do physical labor, to be delivered from the burden of labor. That's a myth, though. I recommend that you look at the film Ancient Futures. It's made like 30 years ago, but it really describes what's happening, and shows people in a traditional context laboring in the fields. The pace is so leisurely. They're singing as they work. There's kids running around, everyone's kind of participating. They work, this was in Ladakh, they work 4 months out of the year producing enough food for the entire year. The non-growing season is full of weddings that last a week, festivals. Like, that's a more accurate picture of life before development than what we see in the, quote, undeveloped places. What we're seeing there is what comes after the destruction of traditional ways. So once that's happened, of course they're going to want development. So that's one thing, the ideology of development. The second thing that I think is really important, it's not just ideology that pushes development, it is also the financial system, the monetary system, which has a need for endless growth. The system fails if there's not growth, because then indebtedness rises faster than the ability to service the debts. Concentration of wealth intensifies, unemployment increases, and eventually the system breaks down. So in order to prevent that from happening, you have to keep growing the economy. What's the economy? It's the totality of goods and services exchanged for money. You have to keep growing that. You have to keep bringing more and more people into the realm of goods and services, and out of the realm of self-sufficiency, of community sufficiency, of gift economics, of taking care of each other, of living off the land, of taking care of each other's children. There's a growth opportunity. Make them pay for daycare. Traditional medicine, make them pay for hospitals. Apprenticeship and learning from elders, put them in school, make them pay for that through taxes, right? That's development. Bring them into the labor force where they earn wages and purchase things. And so there's a financial necessity, a systemic necessity for development. Tremendous pressure to accept development loans in the, quote, developing countries. Development loan means I'm giving you $1 billion. 10 years from now, you have to pay back $2 billion. Where are you going to get that? You're going to get it through cutting down your forests, through converting your people into a labor force and into a market. That's where you're going to get that. But that $1 billion loan, that's a necessity because here is the pension fund, who needs a certain return on investment. Oh, here's a high return on investment. There's a systemic compulsion to do that. So, long story short, or as short as I could make it, we have to change the financial system. We have to create money in a different way than through interest-bearing debt. And I keep coming back to that. I think that's, money is one of our fundamental technologies, or you could even say it's our fundamental story, one of our fundamental stories. It's the way that we circulate gifts, that we meet needs and gifts, and that we coordinate human creativity. It's really fundamental to who we are. And of course it needs to change. But yeah, I wrote a book on that. And, it's part of the picture. Then, of course, there's the internal version of the impulse of money to always grow.
Tell me about the internal version.
It's the way that the money system has programmed us to maximize self-interest, to perceive scarcity, to be in competition with each other.
It's part of our process now.
To get the best deal.
Yeah.
To always seek the best deal.
Yeah. And so part of our our personal mission is to step into our courage to shift that within ourselves, that story, so that we can come into this wealth space.
Well, the courage is what enables us to perform our mission. But I'm sure everybody listening to this can feel the presence of a mission that's not just to survive and reproduce, but that you're here for a reason, to contribute to a more beautiful world. If you're not doing that, you're going to feel quite dissatisfied with your life. Even if you're getting paid $1 million million pounds or euro or dollars a year, you're going to want to find out why am I here and how can I live beautifully? Like, this is universal.
And this word beautiful is a word that, we're sharing. This podcast is called The Future is Beautiful, and this was, your book was the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. What does beauty mean to you?
Yeah, it's one of those things that if you try to define it, you make it less.
Yeah.
To me, it's an elemental concept.
Something that we can feel and that we know.
Yeah, and it makes life feel sacred. Like I look out at the landscape and, the trees, or I hear the sound of the cicadas, and it is really beautiful. And it doesn't have to be. Like, you could theorize a universe that's just drab and ugly, and it would still work. The birds would still be able to reproduce if they weren't quite so beautiful. Like, why do they sing that much? Like, you can say, oh, they're, establishing territory and seeking a mate. Like, that reductionistic explanation doesn't cut it. Like, they sing way more than they have to. It's like they want to pour out their song. I think we're like that too.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, there is the sound of crickets in the background where we're sitting, and when we started, I had this sort of panic. Oh, this is too loud. Like, they're being too loud. And then I was like, no, they're here and we're here, and how beautiful.
It's highly unprofessional, Amisha.
I know, so unprofessional to have crickets. But as we've been talking, it's like they're here listening and they're with us and we're listening to them. And actually, when you were talking about climate change and when you were talking about how when one species becomes extinct, we all feel it, they went quiet. And that's the kind of beauty that we miss when we're busy trying to control everything.
Yeah, we miss it and then we crave it. So we buy more stuff. It's good for business.
Indeed. There's one more thing that I really want to talk to you about, which is the shifting role of the masculine and the feminine, or how we perceive them in our story. And just sitting with you, I can feel that your masculine energy is different to what is present in the dominant story, and that also, as a father of 4 boys, you're probably having a lot of experience and of seeing how they're coming into the world and what is shifting.
Yeah, this is a thing where the old story has fallen apart for many people. Like the kind of macho, 50 years ago we had a pretty clear instruction set on how to be a man or a woman. And we don't have that now. So sometimes people question, well, should we discard this binary called gender completely? And we're just all human with slightly different plumbing, maybe. I never really resonated with that kind of, postmodern view that it's all a cultural construct. And none of the indigenous people I talk to resonate with that either. They say that, yeah, these are masculinity and femininity are like fundamental archetypal forces that channel through different beings in different ways, and channel through men and women in different cultures in different ways. So I think our culture is really at a place of searching for what does masculinity want to be, and what does femininity want to be. Feminism sometimes becomes like all the stuff about Wonder Woman, this movie that I will never see. But it's like, yeah, she can kick ass just like a man. Like as if, is that what feminism is? For women to be just as good at dominating and ass-kicking as the men are, and to be able to be at the head of rapacious corporations just like the men, to have an equal spot in the world-destroying machine. It seems like that is actually a capitulation to patriarchy, not the overturning of patriarchy. So this is, an open question for me. And I suppose I'm open to abandoning the concepts of masculinity and femininity altogether, but, maybe I'm just not caught up with the times. But, like before this interview, like I haven't eaten today, and you were like giving me an orange, and saying, yeah, my feminine part wants to really feed you, I think that's really beautiful. And it does feel like feminine. Not that a man does not have a feminine side, of course. Like, I'm often stirred to take care of children. But, I don't know, I feel like sometimes they need something masculine from me too. Like, Carrie, I have a 4-year-old. He likes to wrestle. He likes to fight. But his mother does not like to fight. But I'm like, okay, let's fight. Fight, kick, push, shove. And he like gets to exercise that. And like he can hit me as hard as he can and it doesn't hurt. And he's allowed to do anything. And he's just like, feeling that in a safe way and learning to be conscious of it. Like I'm really strategic with this. Like this is an arena where it's allowed. This is an arena where we have an agreement. So, yeah. Anyway, this is, I'll just say it's an open question for me. And I'm sometimes a little scared to go into it because there's a lot of shame that comes directed at me when I speak of such things because of the damage that's been done to women and to men too. Patriarchy actually harms men more than women, I think. But women have suffered it in such direct ways. There's a lot of rage there, like huge rage that cannot be suppressed. And I think we have to be present to it. But it's not bottomless. Men have to remember that. Men or anyone who's occupying the masculine pole has to remember that it's not bottomless. And if you stay present to it long enough, which means really being present to it, it doesn't mean kind of neutrally holding space. But if you stay with it, then it will reach its bottom.
Yeah, for me, a big part of it is embracing the balance that we have as men and women of our masculinity and our femininity, and holding and honoring all of the ancestral pain that has got us into this place where we are now, and not blaming the man in front of us for what the fathers and the grandfathers have done. In a story, as you were talking yesterday about, the indigenous story, it's like men were told that this was the only way that they could be, and so blaming a man now for what he's been taught and what feels to me part of that old story. It's patriarchal to blame a man for what he was taught when he was only doing what he needed to do to become a man. And so for me, a lot of it is making space for what's actually present to emerge, and allowing men to be safe in their masculinity, in whether it's the kind of part of it, or whether it's the desire to protect, to create safety, all of these aspects, but also about allowing that feminine space of the nurturing, of the listening, of the softness, And for women, it's the same. We have both of those, you know, like women, like a woman's masculinity comes out when their child's in danger. You know, a woman will.
Yeah, I mean, or you could say that that's this woman, Genia Hadden, has this concept that masculinity and femininity each have a yin and a yang aspect. So our culture has de-emphasized or ignored the masculine yin and the feminine yang, where the feminine yang is like this, and every person has all four, but the feminine yang is like the birthing womb, you know, or the menstruating womb, like the pushing out, you know, the impatience, that kind of thing. I'm done with this, you know, this is no good, you know, like that kind of ferocity. Whereas the masculine yin is the testicular, as opposed to the phallic. Like the masculine yang, like that's the forging ahead, you know, piercing into new territory. Like, I mean, there's like, you know, a sexual, like physiological, anatomical aspect to this. The rising up, you know, like the pushing through, like that whole assertiveness, right? But then there's the masculine yin, which is conservation, undergirding, holding, patient. Like patience is, I think, a masculine quality that is not exercised and valued that much, but like it's kind of like this solidity, this kind of patience. And whereas the feminine yin then is the receptivity, the nurturance. So anyway, yeah, but yeah, definitely.
And so for the men that are listening, that are struggling with the box that they've been put in as men in the world today, what do you have anything to share around how they can unpick that story within themselves?
I think it just starts with maybe realizing our predicament here, that we don't have a story for how to be a man right now. And from that recognition that we don't know comes genuine curiosity and openness to find the way. There are men out there now who are holding knowledge. But yeah, we're in new territory. I don't have a map for it.
Yeah, I love this actually about you and what you share, that actually we don't have to have all the answers, and we don't have to have this big plan that we're working towards and the solution.
Right.
That we're allowed to just be in this mess together and figure it out together, and through connection and through connecting to ourselves and to each other.
It's okay to have a plan, but hold lightly to it, because it's going to need to change at some point. Because the plans that we can make right now are coming from the story that we're in right now.
And as you know, as you, Charles, like in your day-to-day life, do you have any practices or kind of inner mantras that keep you going, that keep you from either not falling into cynicism or staying fully resourced in your own being and in your own energy?
I have help. Yeah. Allies. Who remind me of what I know, but forget sometimes, and keep me going. My practice is to ask, what is it like to be you?
What do you mean by that?
Like, what is it like to be Donald Trump? Like, what is it really like? What is it really like to be the people you judge the most? Or what is it like to be the person in front of you there's a whole other universe. Like you are having an entire subjective experience of the universe. Like it's kind of a miracle, you know? I think that's a very powerful practice.
And it's a practice that can be, is applicable to everything, right? So the tree that you walk past,
yeah.
or even
Politics.
just the water that you put into a bottle before you drink it.
Right. And I'm not saying that you can necessarily know what it's like to be that water, but asking the question and being in the place of the question opens you to knowledge. And you might get a little glimpse of it.
Beautiful. It's a really nice place for us to end today, and thank you so much for this conversation. It was
lovely. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it really has been. And everyone listening, please support Charles's work and read his books, and I'll post a link of how you can do that. It's charleseisenstein.net. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible by you, our community. If you loved this and would like to contribute to our Patreon campaign or join our online group to connect with other listeners, please visit www.thefutureisbeautiful.co and click on community. Please also hit subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes so we can grow. Here is to us, creating a beautiful future together.